don't think people realise just how much change is coming Chelsea's way under Enzo Maresca and why his ruthless approach changes everything from top to bottom. And just importantly, two things. First of all, why his time with Pep as his assistant was key to this. But secondly, the fact that this guy is his own man. And we'll get into both his personality and his tactics in this one. So first things first, who is Maresca? Well, Maresca's season at Leicester was only his second ever job as a manager, having managed Parma for only 6 months prior after being sacked for poor performances. But his Pep-influenced style, in which he won the Championship last season with Leicester City, has caught a lot of people's eyes, and it signifies drastic changes for Chelsea and how they set up now that Pochettino has gone. And one thing that there will be absolutely no doubt about is that these Chelsea players will have utter clarity. Utter clarity. In January of this year, in a season where Leicester City won the Championship, there were grumblings amongst the fans, and Enzo Maresca said this: "I came to this club to play with this idea. The moment there is some doubt about the idea, I will leave the day after." It's so clear, as is his tactical philosophy. So let's begin with the goalkeeper. So early on at Leicester, we saw the Pep similarities show themselves as he made Danny Ward the fourth choice keeper at Leicester, despite him having played 26 Premier League matches in the season prior. And the reason for that was that Enzo Maresca, as I say, in terms of clarity and just putting the work rate in as a manager, he watched every single game of that Premier League season, some more than once. And in it, he saw that Danny Ward was not the goalkeeper for the way he wanted to play. And the reason for this was the same reason why Joe Hart was phased out of Manchester City: distribution. And you can see here evidence. Solarczyk is composed on the ball, which allowed Leicester to stretch the pitch and subsequently play these vertical passes. In this game, he pops it all the way through to Harry Winks. And when it comes to players, it's an interesting question because you've got Petrovic, who became the first choice for Chelsea towards the end of the season, but I think the jury's still out in terms of his ability to play that possession-based style. Now, don't forget, Chelsea have also got Kepa coming back from his loan at Real Madrid, but ultimately, I'm not going to put a name down here because I think a new goalkeeper probably needs to come in. I think there's maybe a stopgap in terms of Sanchez because you know he's got that. And Petrovic, I just don't know enough about him. Let me know in the comments down below if you think he's got the quality with his feet to be that goalkeeper for Maresca. The defence for Leicester under Maresca actually changed quite a few times and he experimented with different systems during the season, but the principles, they remain similar throughout, and we're going to show you exactly what that meant for Leicester City and what it will mean for Chelsea and the casualties that it could create. So at the start of the season, this was the defence that Maresca debuted with. Now, despite it being a back four, it was very asymmetric with Pereira, who we know is a right back and played as a right back or a left back at different times, starting the season as an inverted left back, while James Justin just sort of sat back and stayed back whilst Pereira was able to step into midfield. Maresca stuck with this for a while, but brought in Wout Faes as left-sided centre-back in good time, and he did really, really well. And with Faes coming in, that did change things and made it look a bit like the way that Pep sets his team up. But the point here is that Pereira becoming inverted whilst Faes also remains narrow while stepping into midfield, it gave Maresca's teams a lot of dominance in the midfield and in that middle third in particular, which allows the midfield to flourish, and we'll show you what that means for Chelsea's midfielders next. But first, with this setup in mind, this is how it could look from a Chelsea perspective at the back. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's too many players, Jim. You've done it again. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are a lot of players that play for Chelsea, and not many of them have really, really proven themselves and actually have left a load on the bench as well. But when it comes to the defence, and in every role here, we can put forward two options. But at the back, there are several options. Chelsea have a lot of players. Now, I'm going to take some players away here. I'm going to move them out. Let's take that off him. So I'm going to take Badiashile out. I'm going to take Colwill out, which I'm not sure I believe in. And I'm going to take Chilwell out as well. And I'm going to take Gusto out. Now, this is what I think on paper it would look like. You would have Cucurella stepping up. You would have James stepping in as well. And I know Cucurella may shock some people who didn't watch Chelsea towards the end of last season, but there is a reason that he's been included. He had an inverted role towards the end of the season, and he thrived there. And actually, he played really well during last pre-season in midfield for Chelsea as well. As I say, there are other options. Chilwell feels like a casualty to me because of the principles of Maresca and what he wants to do. I think he's more likely to try and make it work with James, who would be far more comfortable stepping in. And actually, I'd really love to see him in that role. I think he'd be great. But Cucurella, I think, starts here because he would be a bit more comfortable stepping in. Levi Colwill is another great option who could go and do that role. And when you think of Wout Faes, for the Leicester City side, in terms of having actually just an out-and-out defender there, you could take Cucurella out, have James being that Pereira who steps in, Colwill doing the same job here, and I think you're absolutely fine. Or even, you could play Colwill instead of Disasi. You've got Badiashile, you've got Chalobah, you've got a lot of centre-backs that you could work with. So let's mix it up. Let's put Colwill there as well. Because obviously, it's not an 11-man game these days. You've got all these other players that you're going to chop and change. So in terms of development, there's a lot of development that needs to happen here. But also, one of the problems for Chelsea is that they have got, a lot of high-quality fullbacks, and that has been the staple of the best side. I know it's been difficult to get them on the pitch, but with Maresca it will be very, very different because he plays so differently when he builds up out from the back. He likes to be narrow. And I think to start off, Cucurella would be his guy because he would be comfortable stepping in there. I've put Disasi back in there because if you think of Vestergaard, who was a big player for Leicester last season, if you are to copy and paste it, and I'm not sure that is totally the way to go, but if you are to do that, he is that out-and-out defender for you there. And then Fofana, who people have forgotten, plays for Leicester. Chelsea, doesn't play, used to play for Leicester, no, he went to Chelsea. But if you can get him fit and get him as this right-sided centre-back, especially when you think of James stepping in here, if we just clean it up a bit, and Cucurella stepping forward as well, you're going to need someone to kind of stay back and be careful at different times, okay? So having that one, certainly if James is there to step up and you go to a back three at times, that will be something that Fofana, if he is fit, would be absolutely fantastic at. And again, I think the problem you've got, Chalobah would also be a really good option, but Chalobah, it looks like, needs to be sold. We'll see how this video ages, but it'll be interesting to see if he's there at the start of the season and if Maresca fights for a player like him because he sees the value that he can bring. What is a bit of a theme for this video is there are going to be some sort of square pegs in round holes. But what is to the advantage of Maresca is that this is a young, malleable group. And if they are given that clarity that he will certainly bring, then players like Gusto, for example, who I think has been fantastic for them, he could just go to a new level in a new role. Because if he is to do what James is going to do for Maresca's side, and James is going to get injured now and again, then you're going to see another layer to Gusto, a different player from what we've seen, who's been an out-and-out fullback up until this point. Out of possession, of course, you go to that back four, but in possession, it would look like this, where James steps up and Cucurella, when he can, gets on the ball, drives forward with the ball, and then plays that pass into that single base, of which we'll get to very, very soon. Now, Reece James, as I said, has played midfield in the past. He's pretty perfect for him, and he could become the 100-touch man for Chelsea in this setup. And the reason I say that is because of the midfield options and because of the way that Maresca operates when it comes to midfield. And this is where Maresca either thrives or becomes a very expensive mistake for Chelsea, because the defensive setup is just a precursor to allow the midfield to be the heart of the team. The midfield of Leicester last season consisted of Harry Winks, Dewsbury Hall and Wilfred Ndidi. And what he did with Ndidi, it was weird but interesting. Ndidi it was. You guys knew I was going to do that, didn't you? Ndidi you did. It's not as funny second time. So this is how it worked. They played a single pivot. That man was Harry Winks being at the base. And the single pivot could have been perceived as risky in terms of cover, but you have to remember the defenders were being really narrow always, and it always allowed for those straight passes into him to feel safe, because what's a bit more dangerous is kind of a sideways or diagonal pass that gets cut out, because it essentially takes out two players in one moment when something like that happens. So that's why it can be a great pass, but it can also be a very dangerous one. But what this meant, it meant that Dewsbury Hall, who's here, and Ndidi, who was here, they didn't really receive the ball in the middle or the initial third. They picked up the ball in the final third. They look to get into these spaces, and in particular, look to work in these areas here. Dewsbury Hall in particular. And as you can see from their body language in this screenshot, they are not interested in getting on the ball at this moment in time. So why is that? Well, the reason for that, if we move it on one, is that Dewsbury Hall and Ndidi know where they're going to get the ball. And it's not in that early build-up stage. It's that little bit later on. As you can see from the screenshot, what Harry Winks does is he plays that lateral pass to Faes, who steps up, as we've spoken about, and it opens out a pass out to the wing. It's all about playing the lateral pass at the right time, staying narrow to then go out wide and make the pitch as big as possible in the right areas. We're going to get to those wingers and those forwards. It's so interesting. But what you can certainly see is a lovely big space when it comes to the midfield and then the back line. I'll explain exactly why that is in just a second. But that lateral pass is so crucial because, like we've said, like Cucurella would do, Wout Faes steps forward. Harry Winks plays that short pass off to him, sucks in a couple of players himself, and then that pass out wide is always there. We'll get on to the wingers in just a second. And what's really important to say here is that there's a lovely amount of space in between the midfield and the defence. Again, we'll explain that as well. And that allows Dewsbury Hall to get the ball in those areas and be so much more effective. Dewsbury Hall was the star of this team last season with 12 goals and 14 assists. And that came down to picking up the ball frequently in these areas. Everything we've talked about so far in terms of how narrow the defence is, etc., it allows him to remain high. The positioning and the role of the wingers in terms of how wide they are and the threat that they offer also contribute to this. And there are some players at Chelsea who I think could be perfect for that. But who at Chelsea right now is perfect for the KDH role? Well, let's find out. There are some decisions to be made because Caicedo, you would imagine, would very much be at the buttery biscuit base of this Chelsea single pivot when it comes to Maresca. And I think there's an element of, you could dispute it in terms of his quality to be the 100-touch man, but I think that man becomes Reece James. Cucurella, again, I think he makes his way into this team for exactly the reason that he will be comfortable in possession and he will be able to step up. So Caicedo is definitely good enough to play in that position, play it simple when he's got those lateral options that he needs in Reece James and Cucurella. Of course, you've got someone like Lavia, didn't play much. And I guess when we're talking about casualties, good God, there's two massive casualties that you could have when it comes to Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo. I would be absolutely flabbergasted if Caicedo wasn't the starting man in that position, because I think both him and Enzo, that will be a sort of a word down from the ownership. I think it's best to go for these guys. And I think we'll like those players as well. When it comes to the Ndidi role, now, I think, again, you've got a couple of options. Look, is he still going to be at the club? I'm not sure. But Gallagher would be a great fit in terms of not, that energetic profile, not touching the ball all the time, that ability to maybe sniff out a goal as well, but you're going to get that hard work rate from him as well. I'd also love to see someone like JaackMaate in the same role. Different kind of player, but would both suit that role really, really well. I think they would go with Gallagher if he is still at the club. But for the focal point of the midfield, it's got to be him, isn't it? It's got to be Enzo. I think it has to be Enzo Fernandez. To give him the keys to a point in terms of the creativity, you spent a lot of money on this guy, and to give him that opportunity to get there, contribute when it comes to assists, utilise the vision that he's got, and finally reach his best in a Chelsea shirt, I think this is how it will play out when it comes to Maresca, because I think, again, the investment has been so high, and I think you've got two players there with very high ceilings, but you've had a problem of them getting in each other's way. This new system would allow them to get out of each other's ways. But for the midfield and Enzo Fernandez to truly succeed, the attack has got to be spot on tactically and crucially in their understanding and execution of their roles. And who he picks to play out wide, I think, is going to be absolutely crucial in this. And again, I've got a couple of square pegs and round holes, and it's going to be down to Maresca to develop some of these guys in terms of what he truly wants. And if you look back to the stats last season, utterly dominant on the ball, Leicester City. But in terms of shots, there was one or two teams who had more shots than him, but Leicester City scored more goals than others. So it comes down to being a very well-coached team. And I'll give my final thoughts on that element of it at the end of the video. But I think that plays a factor in the nuance of being Chelsea manager. At Leicester, Maresca interchanged his wingers a lot, which is good from a Chelsea perspective with the size of their squad. But his preferred pairing was Abdul Fatawu on the right and Steffi Mavididi on the left. Now, it's important to note that both of these players operated as inverted wingers, but their starting position was often incredibly wide. And again, the reason for that, when it comes to Maresca and his sides, is that once they've got the ball, they know teams either have to go in to go out, or they have to go out to go in. And when it comes to Maresca, he wants to make the pitch as big as possible. And he wants to go in and up and then go out to go in, if that makes sense. This is a great example of how wingers look in a Maresca setup, because you've got Fatawa right here and he has the ball and he's stretching the pitch as much as possible. Meanwhile, you've got Mavididi, who's on the other side, doing exactly the same on the other side. And what this does is that it creates gaps. And as we were talking about a little bit earlier, in terms of that narrowness, you can see that narrowness there, but then of course those players out wide creating the space in the final third, which is obviously absolutely crucial for this side. And what it does against the opposition is it makes it really difficult to sort of not get sucked out of position, because a defender is going to be a little bit nervous here once he gets going. And again, there's so much space knocking about. Importantly as well, gaps in between that back four as well. 1, 2, 3, 4. They actually want to be a little bit more compact, and that has been the kind of blueprint to hurt Leicester City, who did lose games at different times, and it was about frustrating a lot of the time and then hurting on the counter-attack. But you can see the stretched nature of that. Also, crucial to prove the point once again, Dewsbury Hall, look how much space he has. And actually, it's a lovely little bit of space here for both wingers as well once they get on the ball. And actually, this is the same clip, but a minute later, and there's a tiny instance here which I think would excite a lot of people if you're hoping that Cole Palmer's going to continue to do what he did this season. Because look at the, I mean, look at, let's show it in all its glory. Look at the amount of space that there is for that right winger to go in, to sort of step into this area here and then cause a bit of havoc. And I think what's crucial here as well is from this point, you can see the whole pitch. You can see absolutely everything from this area here. And it allows you to sort of cause trouble in terms of stepping in, dribbling in, like someone like Cole Palmer would look to do. But then being able to play those really, really clever passes or curled passes into different areas, or crossfield balls, or 1-2s, or lovely little bits of interchange. Cole Palmer and Madueke would be fantastic. And if you just want to keep it nice and simple, just someone from this position, again, seeing how it all plays, and also for the defender, he's got to keep an eye on the ball. Those darting runs in behind from both sides can be very, very difficult for defenders to deal with because the pitch is so stretched. And also to add to that, they will have time when they are in possession, which again is not really what you want when you've got someone like Cole Palmer and his football IQ. Whilst we're talking about the wingers, once the ball is in the final third, one thing you can be guaranteed with when it comes to Chelsea, we certainly saw it with Leicester, is that they will flood the box. And this works in two ways, because first of all, in terms of that space out wide, you see that, but crucially, the reason those players can't come out from there, and this is against an opposition that are trying to keep that narrow back four, but by flooding the midfield here and actually, attacking vertically as quickly as possible and staying within the 18-yard box to give this player that width, what it does is it means that the defenders have to go with them. They have to go in straight lines. They want to retain they don't want to give away those narrow spaces. And that offers up that simple pass out to the wide man. And if we move it on one more, you can see, look, bodies in the box, real great options for the guy at the back stick. And also for those inverted wingers, the space to be able to come back onto your stronger foot and to get a shot away. Actually, in this clip, that exactly happened, but it did go wide, sadly. Strikers. Now, the striker was actually a divisive topic at Leicester last season as Daka struggled in front of goal, and whilst Vardy scored frequently, there were a few questions about his age and playing every week, and the striker in Maresca's system is virtually non-existent when it comes to being involved in build-up play. Vardy averaged 15.2 touches per 90 last season, and Daka 22.5. But if we use the next goalkeeper as our striker, it's pretty simple. Stay through the middle, stay and push back the defence as much as possible so that that back four of the opposition can't move across comfortably to go and deal with those wide players on either side as well. If you imagine a bit of a rope, I think Maresca would like that rope to stay as tight as possible. He doesn't get it kind of loosened by them dropping deep. Stay on those two centre-backs. So making those runs in behind the defence, it's something that is really important, and it all stems back to stretching the pitch and manipulating the opposition. But who at Chelsea will fill these three roles, and who misses out? Well, firstly on the right wing, it is obvious, but there's depth and there's options when it comes to it as well. So first of all, what I would say is, let's put our goalkeeper back. It has to be Palmer, right? It has to be Palmer on this side, and I think he'd have a lot of joy. What I would say is, against certain opposition, that would be interesting to me. Defensively, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble, and so it probably wouldn't happen. But actually, you could even move it the whole way around, which would be odd, but indeed it was odd as well, right? But I don't think that'll happen. I think that will generally be the way that they'll play, and they'll utilise Palmer by having him out here. But I really like Madueke, and in terms of a Maresca system, Madueke is exactly the kind of player that he absolutely adores. And Palmer is a bit more sort of floaty with his play, shall we say. So that would be an interesting one in terms of Palmer or Madueke. I think, look, you have to play Palmer. And in terms of this system, and if it is that copy and paste, then that's what's going to happen. And look, the philosophy does feel like it's somewhat set in stone. Over on the left-hand side, I think you have the perfect player for Maresca. Sadly, the attributes are within two players. So you've got Sterling and you've got Mudryk. Sterling, I think if you want to be that guy at the back post, say Palmer's going to get on the ball all the time and you want to be there to pick up the scraps and have that sort of bit of, great movement, nous, ability to go and get those tap-ins like he did time and again, or just be around the penalty box and understand the penalty box and score goals. Sterling is a better player in that position than Mudryk. Mudryk is better one-on-one, you would imagine. But again, I think in terms of the clarity of which he wants his team to play, the coaching that they will need to be able to understand, I think Sterling might enjoy it. And I think if you say to him, start wide and then make those runs, I think actually he could absolutely thrive. Absolutely thrive, in my opinion. I'm not sure if people will agree with me on that, but that's just how I feel personally. When it comes to up top, so you've got obviously a couple of options here. You've got Jackson and you've got Nkunku. Now, that simple role of just sort of staying up top, Jackson can do that. Being an out-and-out striker, working the channels, it's absolutely something that could happen. Nkunku, though, you spent a lot of money on this dude. A lot of money. And in terms of having that out and out quality to go and score goals for the team, I think it's good to have two, right? But I would imagine Nkunku would need to be put into this team. And so that's exactly what would happen. I think he would step in. Fernandes would be the Dewsbury Hall, as we've spoken about. Palmer would look to come in at times, but start nice and wide. Sterling could do the same thing, but could make those darts into the box. And Nkunku would look to stretch it as much as possible. When it comes to that striking position, I'm going to leave that one to the comments. Chelsea fans, Jackson or Nkunku as that sole striker, who would you want up there? I've got to ask you guys this, though. When it comes to Maresca, what he is strong-willed. He knows what he wants. He knows who he is. And I think that is something that's great for that group. He's very big on respect for the staff, for their own teammates, for themselves, and the behaviour's got to be correct, which of course is something that is a huge thing when it comes to Pep Guardiola, and we've seen that with players that have made way for those similar kind of reasons. But I do come back to that comment. If he is questioned, if his idea is questioned, then I will walk the day after. And where will that questioning come from? Will it come from the Chelsea fan base? I think if they start well, I think Chelsea fans absolutely buy in. I think they will own the ball. And I think at times it might feel a little bit slow, which could frustrate them. And I think we saw the odd wobble during the sort of second half of the season when they weren't at the races a little bit and the fans got a little bit disgruntled. And at Chelsea, sometimes the fans get disgruntled. If he starts well, I think you could have yourself your Arteta. But what he has to be able to deal with is the noise, is the disruption. And of course, a fan base that is understandably frustrated by the dealings of the ownership. So in terms of that meddling with the idea, Can the fan base stick with him and buy in? That comes from a really good start. But also, can he be left alone to do his job? Because he's clearly a very, very clever manager. I'll let you guys answer that one. So how do you think it will play out? For me, I'm yet to see that patience from the higher-ups or the fan base overall. Maybe this is the guy. And I think, obviously, Chelsea fans want that, and they can see that with Arteta. I just think something will happen. It's Chelsea, and he will probably do well, but maybe not well enough to last more than a year.